Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the Black Carnivore podcast. Here we talk all things to do with a meat-based diet, a carnivore diet. So if you are new here, a carnivore diet is one where we eat primarily from the animal kingdom. So that's like eggs, cheese, any kind of meat, any kind of fish, any kind of fowl. And we do it for the deliciousness of it, the health, the health outcomes, and we talk about it and try to help and support one another through improving our health. So today I'm really excited to bring someone who I actually met face to face at KetoCon this year. And Danielle is amazing and has her own channel and website. So we're going to share all of that. But today we're going to have a conversation and talk more about our experiences with keto, with carnivore, and generally getting your act together, getting your health together. And we learned as we started talking how much of our own illnesses we have in common. So I think we'll start there and kind of talk about autoimmune and allergies and stuff and go from there. So Danielle, why don't you let everybody know who you are, and then let's get into it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction and for having me here. I was so lucky to get you on my podcast earlier this week. We were chatting and we realized that I was just listening to your health history saying, oh my gosh, it mirrors mine so closely. I've never talked to anyone who had such similar health issues. So I'm excited to kind of dive in and share my story. And so I became a nutritional therapy practitioner after recovering my health and really just wanting to spread the word, because I honestly, once you recover your health in such a dramatic way from food and lifestyle, I, I don't know about anyone else, but I just felt like I couldn't keep it to myself and I wanted to share this message. So I was able to retire from my speech therapy profession and do this full time. So my health story goes back to when I was young. I loved processed breakfast foods. I could live off of them: cereal, dinosaur egg, oatmeal, Eggo waffles, toaster strudels. If it was a processed breakfast food, it had my name on it. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and it was that low fat era. And so processed carbs were all the rage. And, eat your rice cakes and have your low fat granola bars, and you'll be healthy. So when I was little, when I was a baby, I actually had eczema. And there's that first piece of that triad. And I also started to have a lot of ear infections from an early age. And I think that I was sensitive to milk. My mom said that she suspected I was sensitive to milk, and I am still. And she thought that it was giving me ear infections. And so I took tons of rounds of antibiotics from the time I was little. And that is so, so, so detrimental to our gut and to our overall health. So I continued, eating these processed carbs because it was healthy and okay back in the day. This is the days of the food pyramid. And I would get, colds and strep throat and more ear infections. I lived on the pink stuff, which was amoxicillin. I used to ask my mom for it. I'm like, Mom, can I have some of the pink stuff? She's like, no, no, you only get that when you're sick. I was like, oh man, I love that stuff. It was sugary. So as I got older, I continued having these issues with basically immune system stuff. And I got strep throat 6 times in a year, my senior year of high school, and then had to get my tonsils out. And the very next year, I started to develop really bad allergies. And of course, that coincides with me being a freshman in college, late night studying, stress, worse drinking, worse eating than ever before. And I had these allergies and started to develop asthma. I would do some sort of physical activity and I would start coughing, and these deep, deep coughs from like the bottom of my lungs. And someone mentioned exercise-induced asthma. I was like, oh, I didn't know that existed. I think I have that. So I got an inhaler. I started to develop more allergies to things. I was so itchy. I was really uncomfortable. And then after college, I moved to Miami, Florida, where the season for allergies is all year round. And I was allergic to so many things. I was even allergic to palm trees. I thought it was like a cruel joke. I'm like, are you kidding me? How could
So
I
wait,
be allergic to?
how did you know you had these allergies? Did you have the test where you like lay down and they prick your back and all of that? Yeah, okay.
They did it with my forearm. So they would prick my forearm. And I always said that when they did this test, it looked like afterwards that they rubbed jellyfish and bee stings on my arms because that's what it felt like. It was so sensitive and inflamed and itchy and painful. It was horrible. I was so allergic that I couldn't even do the second part of the test. They're like, oh, we'll give you the kids one another time because I couldn't tolerate it. I was just so allergic. And I did those allergy shots where they give you really tiny amounts of the allergen and they build up so your body learns to not react to it. So I was doing allergy shots and I had 3 shots because I was allergic to so many things that I had to fit into 3 different shots. And I was getting better. And then a year or 2 later, I started to develop more allergies again. I was like, how come these shots aren't working? So I got more testing. And of course, because I wasn't healing the root cause, even though I was asking, why is this happening to me? I wasn't healing the root cause. So I was developing more allergies to more things. So I had to add 2 more shots to that. So I was having 5 allergy shots and I was going broke on the copays at the allergist. And so they actually allowed me to have a nurse at the job that I worked at give me the shots. And of course, I asked the nurse to teach me how to do it myself. So she taught me, and I was giving myself 5 allergy shots in the stomach every other day because I was that sensitive. I was also at the same time taking Zyrtec and Claritin and Advair and albuterol and Claritin. I mean, all the things. I was taking Singular was the other one. So I was taking all these medications and this was my early 20s. And I also had the chronic sinus infection. So I was always tired. I was tired from the allergy medication. You know the story very well, I'm sure. So I was struggling so much. And like I said, no doctor ever asked me what I ate. No one could tell me why this was happening to me. And so by the grace of the universe, I got a book called The Paleo Diet Solution by Rob Wolf. And I finally learned that basically everything that I had been taught was not accurate for human health. And so I realized that one of the main themes is get rid of processed foods. And I grew up on processed foods that I didn't even know at the time in my 20s. I didn't even know that there were nutrients in vegetables because they didn't have a nutrition label. So I didn't know. I was like, oh, I didn't know there were nutrients in an onion, like vitamins and minerals, because it didn't have the label. I was that disconnected from my food and from what our body should be nourished by. I used to sit and, read the cereal box and read all the ingredients. I just thought that's what they had to put in. I didn't make the connection of like, what is this stuff and why are they putting this in here? That question never came to my mind. And they do a really good job of selling products and being like, oh, this is, cholesterol free and gluten free and heart healthy. So they put all these claims on the box to distract us, to stop us from asking these questions. Tricks are for kids. Like, oh, okay, I'm a kid, I can eat tricks. We don't stop to think, is this what we should be eating? Is this healthy? Is this what a human being should be intaking? So that book really changed everything for me. I started to I basically had to do the opposite of what I was doing. So instead of eating low fat, I embraced fat. Instead of eating lean chicken breasts, I would eat, a ribeye steak or ground beef. Instead of avoiding salt, I would add mineral salt. Instead of only having packaged foods, I only had real foods. So I did basically the opposite of everything I had been doing, even though I was trying to be healthy back then. And I effortlessly got rid of all of my allergies, all of my asthma, never had to take another shot or pill or pump of albuterol ever again. And it was just amazing to me that happened. It felt like a miracle happening inside my body. And I think it's important to remember that our bodies are self-healing machines. And so I like to tell my clients, if I were to cut my hand right now, what do I need to do for my hand to begin healing itself? Honestly, nothing. It just immediately goes to work and starts healing. And that process is happening inside of our bodies at all times. That innate healing intelligence of our body is happening. And so we need to think, okay, if I cut my hand, and then I took dirt and was rubbing the dirt, that would prevent it, right, from healing. So there's things that we're doing that are preventing our body from healing. So we might need to, cover it with a bandage to keep out issues. So the same thing, we need to remove these blocking factors to our healing, and we need to give the body the nutrients it needs to do what it does best. And that's really the premise of how I practice nutritional therapy, is that we need to remove these blocking factors. And I think that for a lot of people, these blocking factors to healing are processed foods, processed packaged foods. And of course, in our environment, if we're a stress case, which I'm still a work in progress on that, so don't think it's all peaches and roses over here. But if we're sedentary, if we're super stressed, if we have toxins in our environment, and if we're eating toxic food, then we're never going to be able to heal. So those are when I did that real food paleogenic diet, no, that's not the word. Ketogenic. I was like, where did I get that from? When I did that real food paleo diet, I was able to give my body all the nutrients it needed. It healed. I reduced inflammation. But then, even though I healed so many things, never got a sinus infection again, about a year later, I had a very stressful year and I started to gain a lot of weight. And I started to lose my period. I lost my period for 6 months. I had always struggled with acne, but my skin was the worst it had ever been. I was getting acne all over my cheeks, all over my jawline, all over my forehead. I was like, oh, thank goodness I have bangs, cover this up. But I also started gaining weight, and I couldn't figure out. I was like, okay, I'm eating this real food diet that I totally believe in and that healed me. And now I'm developing other issues. What's going on? So I Googled and I found out that I probably had polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is also known as PCOS. And it's the collection of those symptoms of the hormone imbalances. So you get missing or irregular periods, acne, weight gain. And then for a lot of women, they get hair growth on their chin and hair loss from the top of their head. So it's driven by high levels of male sex hormones, androgens, so high testosterone or DHEA. So that's why you get some of that male pattern with the hair. Luckily, I didn't have those issues, but the issues that I was dealing with was severe enough, and I was really struggling. So I would look up information about how to
So
reverse
how did
PCOS.
that get started? I mean, I assume that PCOS is something that's ongoing. Like as soon as begin puberty, like it's there. So how did that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
It
It's not.
it wasn't for me. No. I started to develop signs of it about a year and a half after I started paleo, after I had this really stressful year. I'd been living in Florida. I followed an ex back to New York City. I was living in New York. I know that you're from New York, and it was not for me. And so I was super stressed being there, and I was out of the sun and out of my element. And I started to notice that I had all these hormonal symptoms, and I looked online and I connected it with PCOS. And so I was trying to figure out why I had this and what was happening. And there was no real information about it other than they said the recommendations at the time were cut out gluten. I was like, good, I don't eat gluten. They said cut out dairy. I was like, I do paleo, I don't eat dairy, no problem. And they said cut out refined sugar. And I said, great, I have coconut sugar, I have fruit, I have sweet potatoes, I don't have refined sugar. So I felt like I was doing everything right already. So since I just tried to paleo harder, which obviously didn't work because if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I was really stumped, and I was motivated by a family member who said, like, listen, I know that you want to do this the natural route, but nothing's changing. So maybe you need to go to a doctor. So I said, okay, let me try getting some medication just so I could feel better. And I went to a doctor. I said, I think I have PCOS. I can't lose weight no matter what I do. I'm just at a loss. And he said to me, you do have PCOS. You have to lose weight. There's no cure, and you have to take the pill. I was like, did I just pay you for that advice? So,
Yeah.
like you can go mansplain to someone else what to do. So anyway, that was horrible, but it gave me extra motivation to be like, I'll show you. This is irreversible. I'll show you. So it took me a while, and I was still digging through nutrition information. I was always listening to podcasts and on blogs and on YouTube and on Instagram and trying to get all the information I could I was still struggling until one day I heard that PCOS is the diabetes of the ovaries. And I was driving and I nearly drove my car off the road because I was like, whoa, diabetes, pump the brakes. Well, okay. And I thought back, what do I know about diabetes? And I was working as a speech therapist in a nursing home at the time. And so I had a lot of patients with diabetes. And I knew that it had something to do with blood sugar and it had something to do with amputations. And that was the end of the list. That was all I knew about diabetes. So I had to hit the books and go back and realize that, oh, and all these books that I'm reading, even, Practical Paleo, which is right back there on my bookshelf, I would read that book and it would be a chapter on blood sugar. I'm like, oh, I don't have diabetes. And I would just skip it. I would skip it because I didn't think it pertained to me because I wasn't diabetic. I didn't know. I'm like, oh, you have cancer or you don't. You have Parkinson's or you don't. You have diabetes or you don't. It's not like that with diabetes. It's a progressive issue. And it starts with some blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance. And so I thought, I'm pretty knowledgeable about holistic health and wellness. And if I know nothing about diabetes, which is the very end of the spectrum of blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance, what do I know about the very beginning? Obviously nothing. And what does the average person know? Not much. So what I had to do was go back, learn all about blood sugar. And then I said, okay, there have to be some symptoms that I'm experiencing. So the inventory that I took led me to realize that I was a person that when I woke up, I needed to eat immediately because I was getting shaky. When I had coffee, I would get shaky after my coffee. I thought it was over caffeination, but really it was a blood sugar crash. Later on, I tested it and my blood sugar was 60 after coffee. So I had that spike from the cortisol from the caffeine, and then it would crash. I also probably had sugar in it. Let's not let's not hide that fact too. So then I was a person who always needed to bring food with me wherever I went. So I needed to bring a granola bar with me, or when I did paleo, it was like a Lara bar, a fruit and nut bar. I had to eat before I went out to eat.
I used to love those.
I know, right? They're so good
So
because they're just sugar.
virtuous candy because it's,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is so healthy, obviously because it's paleo. And so I would think nothing about that. I had to eat before I went out to eat. And I was like, why do I do this? Why do I do this? It was because I couldn't tolerate being hungry, because heaven forbid the food was a little delayed in the restaurant or it took a while to get seated. I could not tolerate hunger in my body because my hunger wasn't healthy hunger. It wasn't like, oh, I just need a little bit more food and then I'll just wait a little bit and then I'll be fine. It was a blood sugar crash. And so that is a big sign of having blood sugar dysregulation, is that your hunger is not healthy and it is accompanied by symptoms. So the other thing is that during all this time, I would get testing blood work for my PCOS, and I got fasting glucose from the doctor, the fasting blood sugar. And every time it came out between 60 and 63, which is very low blood sugar. Every time I was super shaky. I was dizzy. I felt like I was going to pass out. I was lightheaded. I hated getting fasting blood work. And I remember one time I got blood work and I like stepped back like I was about to pass out because of low blood sugar. And on all of this blood work, not one doctor said anything about the fact that my blood sugar was low. They're like, oh, it's under 100. It's great. Don't need to say anything. So
was
that's their
that
reference.
hypoglycemia? Like, would you have,
Yes.
so you would have self-diagnosed that?
Yes. And so that was definitely hypoglycemia. And then I had the issue of sometimes the reactive hypoglycemia, which is more after a meal, or it could be hours after a meal where you're eating and then your blood sugar is going low. So the other thing that I did that I realized was that I knew that I couldn't tolerate being hungry. So I was a person who would intuitively just snack and graze all day long. So I'd be in the kitchen, oh, a handful of blueberries here, a handful of almonds here. I'll just take a bite of this Lara bar here. I'll have a little sip of coffee that has, milk and sugar in it. So I was self-medicating all day, these little drips of sugar, because I knew intuitively that I couldn't tolerate that hunger and that I couldn't go long periods without eating. But they were healthy foods, so I didn't think anything of it. And we're told eat several small meals and snack throughout the day to keep your metabolism up, right? So I thought I was just following that great advice and never thought anything of it. But what I realized, what I learned is that our bodies, I mean, think back to our Paleolithic ancestors. They were, they'd catch they'd kill a bison and they'd eat that, and then they wouldn't have anything. They wouldn't be able to go to the pantry and, snack on a few almonds and blueberries in the dead of winter and, just be grazing all throughout the day. And so that's not, and I'm not saying that we should only eat one meal a day after we hunted. That's also not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that our bodies were not designed to be constantly eating for our blood sugar's sake and for our digestive system's sake. So I figured out that I had all these blood sugar issues. I had definite signs of insulin resistance because that insulin resistance was driving my PCOS. And so I couldn't make any dent in my PCOS when I was trying to get at those sex hormones to balance them, like trying to take supplements to increase my progesterone and lower the testosterone. That did not work for me at all. I tried that for years. And it wasn't until I started trying to impact my insulin, which was at the root of it, that all those symptoms vanished. So I no longer have any symptoms of PCOS. As you can see, I don't have acne. I lost weight. I have a regular menstrual cycle. I don't have PMS anymore, which I didn't know was possible. I don't have PMDD anymore, which I also didn't know was possible. The only reason why I know my period's coming is because an app on my phone is like, your next cycle is about to begin. I'm like, seriously?
Wait, what's PMD?
PMDD is premenstrual, I think it's dysphoric disorder. And so it's where you get really bad emotional issues before your cycle. So it's a lot of people who have it are like, it's not the same as PMS and it's not a symptom of PMS. It's its own thing. So it's caused by hormonal dysregulation. But again, that went away. So my symptom of that was before my menstrual cycle, the week before, I just felt like I was a different person. And I would usually break up with the person I was dating at the time. And it was like, this is it. This is terrible. And I would end up breaking up with them. It was not good. So yeah, that got better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
wow.
The way that I started improving the blood sugar ended up being that I took my paleo diet, which usually had meat and, a good fatty meat and some veg, and then another vegetable, but it would be a starchy vegetable or some fruit. So I would do a lot of sweet potatoes and plantains and yuca, and I would do a lot of smoothies and acai bowls and honey and maple syrup and coconut sugar and plantain chips and Lara bars. And I'm like, oh yeah, my sweet tooth just disguised itself under this paleo guise. And I thought, here I am thinking, well, it's healthy sugar, right? But obviously the amount that I was consuming it in, when I list all those foods out, that was like my everyday. Those were the foods that I loved. And so that's what I was eating heavily all the time. And I think what happened was, now that I had embraced fat and was eating the high fat and the high carbohydrate, I think that's really what did me in and made me gain all this weight and have a lot more insulin resistance that was more visible than before. So even it was interesting to me that, and there's certain practitioners out there that'll say that insulin resistance is not caused by carbohydrates. And I do not agree with that, because I saw it happen to myself. I was not having these seed oils that, drives insulin resistance as well. I was not having any of those on a paleo diet. And I clearly became very insulin resistant by eating the way that I was eating. So what I did was I took out all those paleo carbs, like the sweet potato, and I just replaced it with a little bit more fat. And so all of a sudden my plate it had ketogenic macros. And so I did keto, I did a lot of fasting, I worked on my digestion, and the PCOS just disappeared. I lost the weight, and it was like, again, another miracle that happened from from food.
So I love that you explain like PCOS is insulin resistance of the reproductive organs. So why do
Yeah.
you think you got that? I mean, some people get prediabetes, some people get skin tags, some people get
Mhm.
PCOS, some people get what is it, Alzheimer's
Yeah.
and cognitive problems. Why did you get PCOS as opposed to the other things?
I love that question, and I don't have the answer to it, but my theory and understanding is that we all have certain genetic predispositions, and we need to remember that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. So in my family, there are several of my cousins who are females who also have PCOS, and they're overweight and they haven't been diagnosed with any insulin resistance or anything because they're terrible at diagnosing that. But I see this pattern happening in my family, just the same as when we have a leaky gut. You can develop joint issues or autoimmunity, or you can get ear, nose, throat stuff and eczema and allergies. And so, or you can get leaky gut can lead to migraines, or it can lead to, a whole host of things. So that's where, again, we see these genetic differences, but the root cause is the same. So some people are going to get IBS when they have a leaky gut, but we got allergies and asthma and eczema. So I think that's where those flavors come in. And so I have a post from back in the day, and I should zhuzh it up and post it again, but it's called Flavors of Insulin Resistance. And it's like different scoops of ice cream that have, like different labels on them. So one says, PCOS, PMS, acne. Another one says diabetes, Alzheimer's, whatever, so it's insulin resistance and blood sugar issues. They're going to affect every single cell in the body, every organ, every process in the body. And I think that where it impacts us most are going to be where we have those genetic predispositions, but also it could be certain nutrient deficiencies are going to drive us to have issues in certain areas, right? So I think it's a combination of maybe our nutrient status plus the genetics, and then that environment, once that trigger is pulled where it's like, oh, you have insulin resistance, that's how it kind of manifests. And again, that's not super scientific, that's just my understanding, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are certain questions that are unanswered, and there are certain things that haven't been studied, and just, and that's just one of those questions. And of course, women's health is kind of in the dark ages, so
Yeah.
they're really not asking those questions. Um, Now, I wonder the next step is like my audience, it tends to be a little older. And so
Mm-hmm.
not only do we have people who are struggling with, reproductive health, at the younger end of fertility and so on, but we also have people who are in the perimenopause, menopausal stage and also struggling with hormones. So
Yeah.
is the person with PCOS also going to have trouble at the other end? Like, how does the older woman get her hormones back in order, and how is insulin impacting like menopause and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I will preface this and say that I'm not a hormone expert, but I do know a few things that are worth mentioning. So one of the things is that the hormonal dysregulation, as it continues throughout your life, you're going to see it impact you in different areas. So if you have hormonal dysregulation when you're, a teenager, you might be riddled with acne and have a lot of PMS symptoms. And as go through your childbearing years, if you're trying to get pregnant, you might find that you have these fertility issues. And then as you go through perimenopause, you're going to see that you're going to have a worse time, more symptoms, right? So this imbalance is just showing up at different times in our life in different ways. And one of the things that I learned in nutritional therapy school, which I thought was fascinating, was that our adrenal glands, when we're little girls, are in charge of making all our hormones. And then when we go through puberty, that's when the adrenal glands give the job to making the sex hormones over to the ovaries. And then when we go through menopause or through that transition, the ovaries are actually passing the torch back to the adrenals and saying, I'm retiring. And so they're like, I'm out, I'm done. And so they're like, I'm going to train you, but that's it. And so that's that process of going through menopause. Is the adrenals are again taking over the responsibility of having to produce all the sex hormones for women. So one thing that really messes up our adrenal glands and depletes them, in addition to just being a woman and being in this, day and age, and especially if we're in a minority group, lesbian, Black, any sort of oppressed, marginalized group, we're going to have worse stress levels, and that is going to impact our adrenals. But one of the things that the adrenals really hates is blood sugar dysregulation. That those high swings and those lows are really going to tank your adrenals. So by improving your blood sugar regulation, not only is that going to help the adrenal glands, which is going to be important as we go through menopause, but what happened to me, why my PCOS got better without me touching the sex hormones, is this premise that's really important. And that is that the insulin is a hormone, and it affects all other hormones. So we have to think about our blood sugar and insulin sort of being at the bottom of this pyramid of our hormones. And there's other hormones on top, like our thyroid hormone and estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. Those are sort of at the top. And then we have also cortisol and oxytocin, which oppose each other. That's on the bottom. And then we have insulin and blood sugar. Sugar isn't a hormone, but we'll lump it in there just for argument's sake. And then at the top, there's all those other hormones. So we have to get our stress right. We have to sleep well. That's going to help the insulin levels. We have to work on our diet, lower those insulin levels. And then that is really going to help those hormones at the top start to balance. And it can take time. For me, it took over 5 months of doing a keto and fasting in a very healthy way to see any changes in my menstrual cycle. So for some people, it can take time. For other people, like different students of mine, they'll say, I just started this and this was the best period I've ever had. So it was sort of a very quick transition. So it'll affect people in different ways, but optimizing your insulin and your blood sugar is the first step and a necessary step if you want to optimize your hormones. But another thing to keep in mind is that lowering the estrogen levels as they go lower, that can make us more insulin resistant. So we're sort of fighting against those low estrogen levels. So that is something that a lot of women actually do better with hormone replacement with bioidentical hormones, not synthetic. And they do really well if they're really struggling. So if you are struggling, my friend Karen Martell, I should connect you guys because she is fabulous. She's like a menopause, perimenopause guru. I outsource all my questions to her for that. So I'd love to connect to you guys because that would be a great conversation to talk about that. But I do know that progesterone, as we go through perimenopause, it is a slow, gradual decline, and then it sort of tapers out. With estrogen, it's up here. And then as we go through perimenopause, it goes like this. So it goes there's ups and downs. So at certain times during the perimenopause transition, you're going to have maybe symptoms of estrogen dominance, and then it's going to change. So there's a lot of fluctuations of the estrogen, which make it even more uncomfortable and difficult to deal with because we don't have enough on our plate. So
wow, that was super, super complicated and way more of an answer than I was expecting. But
okay.
that answers so many questions. And so the cortisol, so the issue of stress, and I'm glad you raised the issue of any kind of marginalized or oppressed group is,
Yeah.
we're dealing with a level of stress that other parts of the population are not dealing with. And that level of stress actually, we talk about stress and people sort of recognize it as, stress, like let's get less stress, let's,
Yeah.
meditate. But stress actually has a real physical response in our bodies. And so you're
Yes.
saying that the stress actually drives up your insulin level and makes you more insulin resistance. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm so happy we're talking about this topic because it's so important to note that I truly believe that the most underestimated cause of blood sugar dysregulation is stress. And like you said, we can think about it like, oh, I'm stressed out because my boss said something or that person cut me off in traffic. But those little acute stressors are not usually what's going to tip the scales. It's this chronic stress. Like if I leave my house or if my, black son leaves the house, like having that fear in, just in your heart, in your body, just all the time, that chronic level of being on edge is really driving our system to think that we are in a state where we need to be fighting for our lives. So our body is going to switch into a sympathetic nervous state system. So our nervous system has two states. It has that fight or flight, which is sympathetic, and the rest and digest. And that's where we balance our hormones, we digest our food, that's where fertility can happen. So the body can do all these extra functions. But fight or flight is really there because it's for survival. So if we're in a fight or flight state, the body is like, oh crap, we are running from a tiger. Let's save all the resources. So you're not going to digest your food. We don't have the resources for that. So that means we're getting not as many nutrients from every bite of food, right? So we're nutrient depleted if we do that. We're causing inflammation because we're not breaking down our food as well. The food is sitting in our stomach and we're reabsorbing toxins perhaps. So that's how it's going to affect our digestion. Then if we're running from a tiger, our body's not like, oh, let's, ovulate so we can have a baby. No, it's not thinking about that. So it's going to take all those hormones that were supposed to be for a healthy menstrual cycle, for estrogen, progesterone, all that, and it will actually steal that precursor hormone and turn it into stress hormones. So you can, if you ever go to your doctor and they say, or a functional doctor, or get labs, and they say like, God, your hormones are like in the toilet. You have no hormones. You have no progesterone, no estrogen, super low. Chances are that it's that steal happening. It's called the pregnenolone steal, where this pregnenolone could be any of the hormones. And instead of going to progesterone, like all the sex hormones, it's being stolen and being made into cortisol and stress hormones. So, and that alone, those high levels of cortisol is going to cause us to become insulin resistant as well, which is going to make us hold on to weight and not feel as good
Wow.
as we can. So it really has a huge impact on our bodies. So one of the most amazing things that I found out recently is that the default state of our body is stressed. I'm like, oh, great. So we're fighting against this. And what puts the brakes on that stressed body and says, you pump the brakes, we are safe, we are fine, we're going to switch into parasympathetic, we're going to heal, we're going to detox, we're going to digest, we're going to ovulate, we're going to do all the things. What does that is our vagus nerve. It's a cranial nerve. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but the vagus nerve it's something that I'm newly learning about, but there are different things that we can do. And again, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm just learning about it. So I'd love to share. But we can stimulate this nerve, and that can actually turn on that rest and digest state. So that's really important when we're going to eat our food, or if we're just, coming home from work, or we just finished a workout program, or we just had a stressful call. We want to get out of this stressed state, and we want to send signals to our body that it's safe. And so there's different ways to do this. So deep breathing, breath work exercises are really, really powerful for the vagus nerve because it innervates, it touches every single organ in our body. So it's very, very connected with our gut and other organs, and it will send signals back to the brain. So there's more signals going from the body to the brain from this vagus nerve than it is the other way around. So the body's kind of giving signals to the brain like, oh, you can relax now. So that's important to know. So the vagus nerve is very innervated. There's a lot by the ear. And so there's a spot, I'll turn to this side. So there's basically anywhere in your ear, you can kind of just like massage your ear. You can pull on it. I'm going to take this out for a second. You can pull on your ear gently. You can squeeze it, but this is going to activate and stimulate that vagus nerve. And I already start to feel it, like my whole, like I could do this for, 30 seconds, a minute, and like the whole side of my face starts to like go numb, or not go numb, but starts to relax. And so if you're ever stressed, like I want to encourage people to, use some of these techniques. There's so many of them. So the deep breathing is one. I really like a 4-7-8 breath. So that's where you inhale for 4, hold for 7, and then exhale for 8. So that's really, really powerful for activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And then another one you can try that works really well. And I was told, like, don't do this too often because it can, like, your body can go the other way. So just, once or twice a day to start out with doing some of these things. But you can put your hands up here and you look all the way to the side and you just kind of stay there until you feel like your body wants to take a deep breath or yawn. Like I'm going to yawn because that's what it does. That's activating. The yawn is stuck now, but that's the activation of that parasympathetic nervous system. And you feel I almost feel like drunk. It makes your body feel, but you feel so good. And so it's a cool way to activate that unstressed system. And that is so, so important to tap into that. So many of us think we're resting, but we're like scrolling on our phones and we're watching TV. That's not true rest. And I'm learning about this because I struggle with this so much myself. I'm sure, as you know, like we have these online businesses, we're always connected. There's no detachment. Like you're at work, are you not at work? We're always at work. We're always on. And so I struggle with this a lot. So I'm having to go out of my way to find a way to get my body to calm and relax. And so I think it's really, another amazing thing is getting, my wife and I call them skull rubs. So it's just like a massage on your head. So get a partner or a family member to give you like little massages on the head. You can press really hard. Your skull can take it. You press really hard on your head. You do some gentle ear tugs. That is amazing. So get your partners and your friends to exchange little skull rubs. And that's a really great way to calm the system and give your body that love and that signal of safety that it really, really needs in order to be able to heal. So that was a long rant on that.
But super, super fascinating. I mean, I've started to talk about why or how blackness is listed as a risk factor for diabetes. And I'm saying that I think that has done the Black community such a disservice because now mostly people are like, well, sugar runs in my family, and, all of my relatives have amputated feet. So that's just, part of what's next for me. But that is like absolutely not true. And what you're saying right now is just like a brand new thing that I really hadn't considered, that in fact maybe the reason why diabetes seems to hit the Black community as harder is that, overall we're dealing with a higher level of stress that comes from the racism that exists in this country and that we face on a day-to-day basis. So
Yeah.
like really, that kind of is mind blowing. And even though I understood that cortisol has an impact on insulin, I didn't, it just didn't occur to me that if you're dealing with day to day stress from, racism or from, it, poverty or from all sorts of things, that you are
Yeah.
actually going to be more insulin resistant and so
Yes.
going to have a bigger and stronger response to a diet that's high in carbohydrates. So, really just making that connection. If you have the ability, trying to calm the nerves in your body to try to reduce the amount of cortisol actually is probably really important. Although I do want to say that, for people who are living in circumstances where you are unsafe, even when you're at home and you've closed your door, this may or may not, I mean,
Yeah.
this is not the resolution. This is,
No.
one piece of the problem, but you do have to figure out how to create a safer environment. And some people may never, unfortunately, be able to
Yeah.
create that environment where they truly are safe at night when they
Yeah.
close their door or whatever. But still finding ways to calm the sympathetic
The
nervous
nervous
system,
system. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
is an important thing to do. So when I have heard of the vagus nerve, but I heard about it in the context of like doing box breathing as one way to calm it
Hmm.
down. I didn't know anything about the ear or doing these, scalp massages.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely going to go down the rabbit hole there. And you definitely um, helped me to see that doing some of these other things might actually be really helpful, like meditating, and I guess there are various things that people do to reduce the cortisol.
Yeah, and the reason why I like some of these things as opposed to, so I have a weird relationship with meditation because I just am not good at it, and I practice, and but the thing is that it's not that I'm not good at it. Okay, if you're not good at something, you need practice. So, but I feel like it's a waste of my time because I do it so often and then I don't really see the benefit from it. So these practices, the breathing and, all the vagus nerve stuff that I was showing you, they actually will work. And so they're much more time effective. And they're also like, you can just, you know, do this in your car. You can do this when these are free modalities and they're very simple and even just helpful, if you're not in a safe space, but you're in your home at night and your door is locked, doing some deep breathing, if you have that as a strategy, there being on alert, perhaps in certain cases is necessary, but perhaps it's not always necessary because it's not helping in any way. It's just
Right.
really like, so to give someone the ability to calm their nervous system when they are in this state of fear or perceived danger, when it's nothing they could do, they're in their bed at night, like, but they just can't wind down, to tap
Hmm.
into this, to send that message like, okay, your body is as safe as it can be right now, like we have to get to sleep, there's nothing else we can do. That can be a really powerful tool, for anyone to
Hmm.
try on. So I hope that's helpful
Yeah.
to a lot of people because these strategies are, they are really powerful in your body. And I just wanted to say that with the one where you look to the side, that one, the person who taught that to me, she said she had to be looking to the side for 3 minutes before her nervous system finally like took a deep breath. So you might be there for a while and you're like, what is this even doing? But give it a chance to work. And then slowly you'll see your nervous system will start to, what you need to do is have what's called vagal tone. So that vagus nerve gets, it's almost like you're working it like a muscle. So it
Hmm.
becomes more and more toned so it can be better at putting the brakes on the stress system. So that's kind
Hmm.
of what we want to do. We want to engage it, work it so it's stronger and able to turn on when we need it to.
Hmm.
So that's kind of,
So that's actually really fascinating, and I feel like I mean, we talk about how our world today, our bodies are not matched to the world that we live in today. So
Yeah.
getting stressed when, I don't know, your biggest stressor is like being, having a predator trying to eat you. Um, our bodies are great. They're designed perfectly for that kind of stress, but they're not designed for the stress of, perhaps living with a violent alcoholic partner, or living in a really dangerous neighborhood, or dealing with a horrible boss. Like, those are the
Yeah.
kinds of stressors where our whole bodies are just not designed to deal with that. And in fact, being like on high alert all the time is not helpful. It's actually working against us. So it's awesome to hear these ideas. Do you have like a blog post? Like, where can people start digging deeper on these things, and what do
Yeah.
they do?
So the stress stuff, I don't have any content out about it yet because I feel like I'm not proficient enough. This is my own, complex
Yeah.
that that I don't have any information really out there yet. I do have some information inside of my blood sugar mastery group, and that is I have a whole module on the adrenals,
Mhm.
and we have vagus nerve exercises, but I don't have it on my regular Instagram. I will start doing it. I feel like this message needs to get out there. I just feel like since I'm not an expert and I don't want to, make anyone hurt themselves by doing too much of it, that, since I don't
Mhm.
know all the nitty gritty, but a little exercise here and there, you can look it up on YouTube, like vagus nerve exercises. And I learned from Dr. Carrie Rigoni. She is from Australia. She's fantastic. She also does a lot of work with children and how their vagus nerve, how you can tell if they're stuck in like a fight, flight, freeze response. Super fascinating stuff. So I'll just refer out for that one for now.
Awesome. So that is super helpful. I really appreciate that. And, we're all in a state of learning. Now, I have a
Yeah.
question that is, probably maybe not interesting to listeners in the same way, but like, I loved when I started to learn about this in 2015 and learn about low carb and all of this stuff, and the impacts on of insulin on the body and pre-diabetes and diabetes. All this stuff was just super fascinating to me. And there was a part of me that thought about going back to school and getting a degree. And there were, people who know me closely who were like, why don't you do that? And I decided I didn't want to, because I saw like what was happening with Tim Noakes, and also Dr. Fetke in New Zealand, where people who were speaking out against the institutions, having the institutions trying to pull their certifications and keep them from being able to practice, or
Yeah.
undermine their credibility. And I decided that I didn't want to deal with that. I wanted to be able to speak freely about my opinions, and not have to defend or hold on to a license. So, but you had your health epiphany, and you decided, I, you know, I, I'm going to go and get the certifications and be credentialed. So, is that something that you are concerned about, or have things changed enough where that's not really an issue? Like, why did you go forward with that? And for anybody
So
who is like, I came here for carnivore or keto information, I don't care about this. I'm sorry, but I got to ask that question.
no, yeah, I'm happy to answer this question. So I studied at the Nutritional Therapy Association, and I had listened to other people who were NTPs, that's our certification, nutritional therapy practitioner. I had listened to other NTPs, and I loved what they were saying. I felt like it was very aligned with what I already thought. So when I went to school, we learned about amazing stuff that is so aligned with what I already thought. The premise of the Nutritional Association is to focus on the foundations of our health, which are a nutrient dense whole foods diet, hydration, digestion, minerals, fatty acids, and blood sugar handling. So these are the nutritional foundations to health. And when you target all of those areas, even if someone has other hormonal issues, cardiovascular issues, immune issues, if you dial in the foundations, everything gets better. And I loved learning their approach because it was so powerful and it was what I had been missing in my own treatment of myself. And so I was able to shift my focus. Like I thought about digestion for the first time. I didn't realize that stomach acid and bile were so important, especially for people eating a high fat, ketogenic diet. And I didn't realize those symptoms like, oh, I was burping and getting bloated and within an hour of eating. And, I have weak fingernails. I didn't know that was related to low stomach acid. And, I even used to have heartburn. That's related to low stomach acid. So there's so much information that I learned. And it was very aligned with what I already thought. And everything that I say, the NTA is aligned with. So I even did continuing education for the students in there. So I don't have an issue with my credentials. But what I learned is that there are the classically trained dietitians, their programs are sponsored by, and you can go and look this up, it changes every year, but they have a history of being sponsored by companies like Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Splenda, like big food companies like Kellogg's, ConAgra Food. And now they're being even sponsored by Bayer, who owns Monsanto, which is a process, the GMOs. And they're sponsored by these big food companies. So the message out there for a lot of dietitians, you'll hear them say, is that anti-diet. So they don't want people to diet. They say do intuitive eating, which is never going to work if you have blood sugar dysregulation and you have addictions to processed foods because they are made to be addictive. So that's like asking an alcoholic to intuitively drink alcohol. You can't when there's like, it doesn't
That's not
happen.
gonna work.
Yeah, it's not going to work. So you can't have someone intuitively eat processed foods because they're going to be driven towards those processed foods. I was only able to intuitively eat when my blood sugar was very regulated and I wasn't including those foods. But because the processed food companies are in bed with the dietetics programs, they're saying all foods can fit. There's no such thing as a bad food. We don't want to demonize foods. And I think that this message might be helpful to a very small fraction of people. But for the most part, it's driven by this message that they want all foods to fit so that, a 6-ounce can of Coca-Cola can fit into your balanced diet. They love using words like that so they can sell products. And I think that very well-meaning dietitians are now, they're being taught this way. And they're saying like, everyone, there's too much yo-yo dieting and, people are sick because of it. And if they just say that, all foods can fit, it'll be better. But I see that message as being pretty harmful. And then there's a lot of dietitians who have sort of spoken out and not been able. So my friend, Michelle Hearn, she's a registered dietitian. She wrote the Carnivore book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. Did you have her on your show?
Yeah, I love her,
Yeah.
and I've been on her show, and her book is awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And so she was saying that she was a dietitian. She wasn't able to practice and give people the diet that helped her heal because she was a registered dietitian and she wasn't allowed to teach keto or carnivore. And they have to have these massive amounts of carbohydrates, even if a person is diabetic. And I think it's just harmful. So I think that where you get your certification matters the most. That was a really long roundabout way of talking about it, but okay. Hope that helps.
No, I mean, that was super, super helpful. And you have answered my question in a way that I have not heard before. So I am so glad that there are starting to be institutions that are recognizing the importance of the message that we are talking about here. I mean, sometimes I feel, I feel hopeful because, I think that this is going to have to be a grassroots movement, that the changes that are occurring because people from the ground up are like,
Yep.
I know what you're telling me, but that I'm not losing weight that way. I'm getting
Yep.
sicker. And
Yep.
so I'm going to do something different because that way it's not working. And so these changes are happening from the ground up. And so sometimes I feel like, the authority is never going to change. Especially when I hear like now dietitians, like the whole industry is really being funded by these companies. But on
Yeah.
the other hand, to know that there are other certifying bodies that that are supporting a different message is that's hopeful. So I'm hoping that there's more and more, as there's more and more education, there's more and more knowledge about this way of eating. So maybe there is
Yeah.
time for me to go back to school. I don't know. We'll discuss
Yeah.
offline. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely love the NTA. I couldn't recommend them more. And I felt
Hmm.
like it was an affordable, short enough program, but it really gave me so many tools. And you know a lot already. And I came in knowing a lot already. And so I think
Hmm.
they were great.
Nice, nice. Okay. So where can people find out more about you? What services do you offer? And do you, I assume you work with people on a range of low carb options from, just sort of paleo all the way to carnivore. So,
Yeah, so I hang out a lot on Instagram. My account is Danielle Hamilton Health. I do have a YouTube channel, but it's slowly getting built up. But it's mostly recordings of my podcasts. My podcast is called Unlock the Sugar Shackles, and my website is Danielle Hamilton Health. And so I work with people one on one, but I really am starting to mostly promote my group coaching program because I find that it's so much more effective and I get to actually have more one-on-one time with each person in it. And my program is called Blood Sugar Mastery. The next round is going to be this September 2022. And it goes through how to optimize your blood sugar and get really healthy using these tenets that I learned in the Nutritional Therapy Association. So I don't really broadcast all the things like that, but it really is a holistic approach. So we're looking at optimizing the nutrient quality of your foods, how to sift through these marketing terms on food labels, how to optimize your digestion with, the parasympathetic nervous system. We have to get into rest and digest. We need to chew our food thoroughly. We can use little supplements or even just apple cider vinegar to really help our digestion, our fat digestion. And that's going to help our gut. It's going to help us extract more nutrition from food, how to stop the blood sugar spikes, how to get into ketosis, how to play with different fasts, how to optimize your hydration. We talk about lifestyle factors like adrenals, movement, stress reduction, sleep. We talk about how to support your liver, which is a major organ of blood sugar regulation, and then how to cycle back in carbohydrates, because as much as we can do really, really well on a keto or carnivore diet, as women, it is really important to occasionally step out of that, being in ketosis. And this is, kind of controversial on a carnivore page, but, you know, ketosis and carnivore is going to be associated with the body being in more of a survival state. And so we want to just on occasion step out of that and then go right back in. So we send the message again, we're sending messages to our nervous system like, hey, there's food around, there's carbohydrates. We don't need to starve. It's fine. Our body was built for cycles of feasting and fasting. And so, initially when I did keto, I couldn't do any carb ups for a long time. It would wake up my sugar dragon. I'd be craving carbs again. I'd be off the rails. So I couldn't do it. So there's a period of time where you might need to heal and do this for several years. But most people see that even just doing, one carb up per month, or, some people will do just one carb up every weekend. And it could be, whatever carbohydrate you choose, or you don't have to, of course. This is all bio-individual. But that has been shown to be really, really helpful. And people actually start to see even more fat loss because they might have been
mhm,
plateaued. And then they go right back in, animal based, animal heavy. And that's kind of what I help people find is their version of
Mm-hmm.
what works. And then we keep in mind that our bodies love change and they adapt to that change. So occasionally switching things up and then going back to what's good and having those cycles can
Mm-hmm.
be really powerful. So that's the
So
program.
what is a carb up? Is that like a meal a day or a certain number of grams of carbohydrate that you're aiming for?
So I don't do it that way where it's like a certain number of carbs, but I think that and I know Paul Saladino talks about having fruits as being the most highly tolerated because it's the part that the plant wants you to eat. So there's not as many anti-nutrients in certain fruits. And so the carb up would just be including an amount of carbohydrates and giving your body a little bit of insulin. And it's not a bad thing in a context of really low carb and then occasionally switching out. So one of the things I find is that we want to aim for metabolic flexibility where we're able to sort of flex in and out of ketosis as opposed to only being able to tolerate fat and carbs. Fat and protein. So we lose that ability to tolerate the carbohydrates. We kind of want to stick with having both. So what I find is that most people come in from a standard American diet. We're totally overeating carbs. So the pendulum has swung this way towards the carbohydrates. In order to heal and reverse that, we have to swing the opposite way. We need really high fat. And at the beginning, probably a little bit more of moderate protein, not high protein, because we want our body to be able to burn fat. And so we can get into a state of ketosis by doing this. And then once the body is burning that fat efficiently, we can kind of swing back the other way and we can go a little bit higher protein, which is probably what you're doing on a carnivore. We don't need to be at 75% fat, which is a lot. And we can up the protein a little bit. We can lower the fat a little bit. And then on certain days, you just lower the fat and switch to carbs and then go back. And that can be really, really helpful for people. I was just listening to a talk from Dr. Daniel Pompa. It was his talk from KetoCon. And because I had missed it, I was at Michelle's talk. And he talks about how important diet variation is. And that a lot of people like me, I went paleo and it worked until it didn't. And then I was like, let me just paleo harder because this used to work for me. And then I switched to keto and then that worked. And then that kind of stopped working for me. So I had to add back in carbs. And then I kind of went carnivore and I'm doing that for a little while. And then I go back. So the body likes variation. So you can think of being carnivore as your home base because your body loves it so much. But also, if you've been doing this for a while, not being afraid to try something else, because you could always come right back, right? You could always come right
Mm-hmm.
back if it doesn't work. But thinking, just keeping in mind that we live in this cyclical, I mean, as women, we have a cyclical nature to us. And the earth, we live here on the earth and there's cycles in the earth. So maybe during the summertime, it's appropriate for you. Your body is just like, wow, I just feel like I could have some fruit. And so you have some fruit in the summer, then you go back carnivore when it's that's what we would have been doing. We would have been eating more carnivore, dabble with more fasting over the winter months. And so if you can think of having a cyclical nature and living more in line with the cycles of nature, I think that would be the most optimal for many of our bodies. So just something to think about. No
Mm-hmm.
pressure for anyone, but just food for thought.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate that. And the way I approach this is that, the goal is to heal. So, the goal
Yeah,
isn't to be more perfectly carnivore. It is
love
to
that.
heal. So you kind of have to figure out what is the path there. And I found my path was really helpful to be very strict, but not everybody is needs to do that or wants to do
Yeah.
that. So, I'm open to that. But I wonder if, a way to think about it is like, all of the holidays are your opportunity to have that carb up. And, that's sort of
Yeah.
built into, everybody's culture. Everybody's got,
Yes.
I don't know, I would say, what are there like 8 major food holidays throughout the year, whether you're talking about Christmas,
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, New Year's Day, probably Valentine's Day for chocolate. And there's,
Let's definitely include that one.
yeah, there's the 4th of July
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Labor Day and Halloween. So,
Yeah.
there are some major opportunities. And if you kind of look at it where you just let that carb up happen, let that cheat happen for the holiday and know that it's going to be just that one day and you just kind of let it go, like that could be an approach that actually, is helpful
Yeah.
for some people.
Yeah, I think the biggest enemy to this whole thing, and you mentioned it, is perfectionism. And I totally struggle with perfectionism myself. And I work with a lot of clients who also will say, "Oh, I already messed up, so I'm just gonna like keep going." And it's like, don't compound the mistake, right? So don't make it
Yeah.
worse, but be like, okay, what? And I always tell people, go back to what you learned from that experience. So you had some pie at, Christmas. What was it like? Was it great?
Mhm.
Did you feel good after? Was it like just enough to keep you going? Did it wake up your sugar dragon? Did it give you a stomach ache? Were you craving? Like, what was the experience? Let's just label it. Let's not judge ourselves. Like, can we get out of that initial thought to like be in that shame space? Can we come out of that and be like, what did I learn? Well, maybe pie wasn't a good choice because it had gluten and refined sugar. Maybe if I had something like chocolate covered strawberries or something like, or I did a dairy free ice cream or something like that, maybe that would have been a better choice, or some fruit, or, so playing around with these things and just taking the inventory. Keep a note on your phone of
Mhm.
like, what happens when I did a carb up? What did I feel? Was it like, wow, I had been craving carbs for a while and that kind of put out that feeling that I needed it? Or did it start it all over again? Was I insatiably hungry the next days? Just take inventory, learn your body.
Mhm.
Don't be afraid of it. Just learn what it's telling you, tap in. And, you know, I love the idea of experimenting. So, whether you're experimenting with carnivore, experimenting, rotating it a little bit more,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
all good.
Yeah. Well, I do tell people to wait on the experimenting. So don't do that in the first
Yes.
2 months,
Thank you for
let
saying that.
yourself
Let
get
yourself,
acclimated.
yeah. And we're talking about people, that is a really good thing to mention. I'm talking about people who have been doing this for a while. If you're new to carnivore, sticking with it is the most powerful thing you can do, because your body is looking for that consistency and you're looking to heal, right? So once you've achieved that, once you're like, wow, I am feeling really good. My blood sugar is more stable, or maybe I'm not in the diabetic range anymore. I don't have cravings. My gut's feeling good. That's the spot you want to be in. Be in that spot for a while. And then once you feel good there, then that's when we're talking about these things like carb ups and experimenting. So, things for everyone, no matter where they're at on the journey. Thanks for saying
Nice.
that. Good reminder.
Nice. Well, we have
Yeah.
had an amazing conversation. I really appreciate your answering all these questions. And I love that we kind of had a chance to, talk about women's health from puberty to menopause, which is really helpful. And I don't often, really get to dig in deep on that. So thank you. I really appreciate that. So
Yeah.
I think you already told us where to find you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and I'll put it down in the description. So everybody who's watching, definitely go follow Danielle. She's got amazing information. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much for having me.